Sophie Hardy and the Battle of the Myriad by M.R. Dale, narrated by Leona Hall. Chapter 4, That's Life. Having washed up and got the very basic beans on toast ready for tea, Lizzie had to have the two separately, as having bean juice on the toast was unthinkable to her. Sophie tidied up the living room and washed up the plates and cutlery, again. She also thought about getting her mum back into the real world to see if she wanted anything, but she couldn't face the earful of abuse she would get for disturbing her. While she was on a roll, she got the wash basket down and emptied the washer. As it had been there a while, it was full of Tom's clothes. She took each piece out and folded it neatly in the basket. She tried desperately to hold back the emotion that was building inside her as each item brought back its own memory of her dad. Not caring that it was still damp, she held some of Tom's t-shirts to her face and closed her eyes. The sinking feeling returned to her stomach, but this time, with nothing else to distract her, she embraced it. From deep within her gut, a huge rush of uncontrollable emotion rocketed through her. She slumped onto the floor, put her head in her hands, and went to cry. Before a shriek of pain left her mouth, Sophie gritted her teeth and fought back against the onslaught. Clara had got it much worse. It wouldn't be fair for you to sit here and scream in pain, or cry, or make out like you're suffering. That wouldn't do Clara, or Lizzie for that matter, any good, a voice from deep inside Sophie told her. The more she focused on the suffering of her cousin and sister and how she could help them, the sadder it made Sophie, but the less sorry for herself she felt, and strangely, that made her feel better. It was a lot of emotion for her to take on at once, but the fact that she felt better thinking like this helped immensely, albeit temporarily. Taking a deep breath as the emotion became easier to deal with, Sophie got herself back into the real world. She finished the folding and carried the basket through the living room, where Amelia and Lizzie were still sat around doing not a lot. However, Amelia was now logged out and was sitting in silence with Lizzie. "I'd have done that," Amelia said, seeing Sophie passing through with the washing. "It's been in there over a week," Sophie replied. "A week? It's only Saturday," Amelia snapped back. "It's Monday, Mum," Lizzie said, in a chirpy tone. It was almost as if she thought she was impressing her mum by correcting her error. Amelia looked baffled by this. "Shouldn't you have been in school then?" she asked, shrugging her shoulders. "Schools are closed, Mum. It's been all over the news," Sophie said, reaching for the door handle to the bedroom and talking in a tone that implied she knew Amelia wouldn't know what she was talking about, and she was instantly proven right. "Why?" Amelia asked. Lizzie didn't say anything. Sophie pointed at her sister and waited for the penny to drop. Amelia looked puzzled for a second, as the proverbial penny hovered for a second, then plummeted. "Oh, that." Lizzie shuffled in her seat, feeling slightly uncomfortable, almost like Amelia was blaming her for something. The satisfaction of showing her mum she could be clever had quickly gone. Sophie said nothing. She just rolled her eyes and walked out of the room. She was getting cross with Amelia, who just sat around doing nothing all day, leaving Sophie, Clara and Lizzie to fend for themselves. If Tom had been here instead of Amelia, Sophie thought, then he would have been reading up all about this mystery, and the two of them would have been trying to get to the bottom of it, rather than being completely out of touch from it. Amelia was so far out of touch from it that she didn't even realise what day it was, or what her two daughters and her adopted niece were supposed to be doing that day. Entering her bedroom, Sophie saw Clara lying down on the floor. This was where Clara had been sleeping for the last few days since she had moved in. The plan was eventually to move into Clara's dad's house, but as Amelia hadn't done much over the last few days other than sit on the internet, the paperwork hadn't been done yet, so they were all stuck there in the tiny flat. To Sophie's surprise, Clara wasn't zoned out. She was just on the floor staring at the ceiling. Sophie walked over to her, lay down next to her, and gave her a hug. Immediately, Clara tried to wrestle out of it, so Sophie let her go. "What do we do?" Sophie asked, trying to give Clara something else to think about. "About which bit?" Clara replied. "My parents, your mum, Lizzie, Condenar, Miss Sissons, which bit?" Sophie thought for a moment and tried to compartmentalise their problem. Talking to Clara like this was like being in scope without actually being there. "Your parents we're working on," Sophie began. Clara just shrugged at this, but Sophie carried on anyway. "My mum, I don't know what to do with her. Lizzie is fine, she'll just take some getting used to. Miss Sissons, we can't do anything about. She vanished last week, and we have no way of finding her. Yasmin has tried. The only thing we can work on is who Condenar is." At that moment, the bedroom door opened and in walked Lizzie. Who's Condenar? She asked, perching herself on the end of Sophie's bed, oblivious to the fact that neither her sister nor her cousin wanted to talk to her there and then. Sophie and Clara looked at each other, had one of their silent conversations, and concluded that it couldn't do much harm to tell Lizzie about it. She was almost fully clued up on everything else anyway. One of your secret missions, is he? Lizzie asked innocently. She, apparently, Sophie replied. Really? Who's she then? Lizzie quizzed. We don't know who she is, but apparently she's coming to take revenge on the world, Clara said with a sigh. Coming like all the other mythicals you said were coming but haven't, Lizzie said, with no trace of sarcasm, just bluntness. Sophie looked at her. She wished she had a comeback for her, but when she was honest with herself, Sophie realised that from Lizzie's point of view, Sophie must have sounded crazy. Children have aged, and people have vanished in the last 2 weeks, Clara snapped back. What more evidence do you want? That was the people at Shadow. That's what it says on the internet anyway, that it was all a plan to get people to buy their product, but it's gone wrong, and so the company is going into ruin, Lizzie said, this time deciding that Clara wasn't shouting at her, and so therefore could be reasoned with. Sophie smiled at the ridiculousness of what Lizzie had just said. No, it wasn't, and no, it isn't, she replied, still smiling at her sister's perceived ignorance. So where are all these creatures? Lizzie probed. We don't know, Clara replied. We know they're out there, but we don't know where. Perhaps they're all hiding together, Lizzie suggested, with no evidence to back this up. It isn't like anyone cares anyway, Clara added. Look at your mum. She doesn't care about anything other than her precious social media accounts and what her friends were up to. There are bigger things in this world than what's on those screens. I care, and I believe you, Lizzie replied, in what Sophie assumed had been an attempt to make them feel better. Talk to Mum. She'll believe you as well. She loves you. There was an apparent innocence in what Lizzie was saying again, but this time Sophie wasn't sold on it at all. Lizzie wasn't being innocent. She was being naive, and it was about the one topic Sophie couldn't maintain a neutral stance on. Mum. Clara also looked at Lizzie with huge doubt in her eyes, and Sophie stood up and made for the door, a temper suddenly rising at her sister and her gullibility that she hadn't experienced before. Come with me, she instructed the other two. Making her way into the living room, Sophie stopped next to Amelia, with Clara and Lizzie a short hop behind. Mum, last week a dragon and a group of changelings attacked me, Clara and Yasmin at school. We managed to stop them, but not before Kingsley, the new boy, had sent the changelings to the underworld. Then it was the changelings who made everyone disappear and caused the children to get older. We know because we were there. I wasn't, Lizzie added, and Sophie shot her a look that made her wince. Amelia looked at her eldest daughter dumbfounded. Oh, and Clara and Yasmin and I now work for a secret agency that's going to prevent an attack on the Earth by an alien who thinks humans are responsible for something horrific, but we aren't sure what she's going to do when she arrives. Amelia didn't say anything at first. She just shook her head. Of course, dear. What did you have for tea, and where's mine? Was the only sentence she could mutter in response. They're telling the truth, Mum. I believe them, Lizzie said. Sophie thought for a second as to how else she might be able to convince Amelia. Then she zoned out, found some photos of the changelings that she had taken when they were following her and the dragon that she had sent Miss Sissons when they were studying it mid-battle, trying to work out what it was, and sent them to Amelia. There you go, photos of everything that happened, she said, hoping that Amelia would open them and believe them immediately, but knowing deep down that wasn't going to happen. OK, dear, I'll look at them later, Amelia replied, not even looking up from the nothing she was doing, and the inevitability that Sophie had been waiting for arrived. No, Mum, look at them now, Sophie implored, desperate to prove her point to Lizzie that Amelia wasn't interested. I'm a bit busy, she replied, not really doing anything in particular. Sophie stood there agog. She wasn't expecting to get quite so frustrated in order to prove her point. How dare Amelia say she was busy? Sophie was expecting her to dismiss what she was saying, but not flatly take no interest whatsoever. This made Sophie incredulous towards Amelia. Just do it, Clara barked from the back. Fine, Amelia snapped back. Then she zoned out. A few seconds later, she zoned back into the room and simply said, Very good, dear. They're real, Mum, Sophie assured her. Of course they are, dear, Amelia replied, not really looking at the trio. Sophie turned to Lizzie and shrugged, and the three girls marched back into the bedroom. See? Sophie asked Lizzie. I think she needs to see a real mythical. That would be a good idea, Lizzie theorised. We haven't got one in the flesh, Clara replied flippantly. So go and get one then. Then she would definitely believe you. Lizzie wasn't letting go of the idea yet. Sophie knew exactly what Lizzie meant and knew she was right. She could see a scope agent in her yet. The sentiment about the plausibility of the mythicals returning could be said for almost every other adult. They needed proof that the mythicals were still around before any of them would snap back into reality and stop wasting away in the online world. "Have you got any idea where they all are?" Lizzie asked. "No," replied Clara. "Do you have any idea who Condenar is?" Lizzie asked again. "No," Sophie replied. "We've searched everywhere in the Scope archives. There's nothing." "What about Dad's book?" Lizzie asked. Suddenly, Sophie felt sick to the pit of her stomach. A fire inside her was briefly lit. She suddenly wanted to lunge at Lizzie for even saying the word Dad. She wasn't ready to hear it in the context of her own father. Other people's, fine, but when it referred to Tom, she was starting to learn that she couldn't bear to hear the word being uttered. "Yeah, what about your dad's book?" Clara asked. Sophie shuddered and wanted to scream again, but she managed to keep it in. Knowing that Clara hadn't meant it as a negative thing, and that she couldn't scream and shout about Dad because she had had 10 years with him, Lizzie had only had about 1, so it was unfair to complain and say how upset she was. In that split second that the conversation had shifted, Sophie's brain had gone into overdrive with so many thoughts. Instead of trying to deal with them, she just shook her head and hoped the conversation would change. Lizzie and Clara took this as Sophie had tried looking inside the book, but not found anything. In reality, though, Sophie couldn't bring herself to go near it. The girls sat round the crowded bedroom for a bit longer before Clara said that she was going to sleep. Feeling empathetic, Sophie again offered her the bed, but Clara insisted on sleeping on the floor. It baffled Sophie as to why, but Clara was adamant, despite it being harder and colder than the bed. Clara said that it made her feel better, which again Sophie found odd, but could relate to. Sophie herself eventually fell asleep. In the night, she ventured out to the kitchen to get a drink of water, when she, once again, heard Lizzie fetching her snack. The television was showing the news, which was talking about how, despite Shadow being the main channel of people's anger, implant usage had gone up. Sophie found it confusing as to why, when people thought something was wrong or unfair or dangerous, they soon forgot about that prejudice when it came to their own convenience. Surely adults should stop using the internet implant if they thought Shadow were evil or causing cataclysmic disasters, but no. They just carried on using them because it was easiest for them, but more than happy to openly criticise the company without actually following through on their vicious comments. If it was a cause the adults truly believed in, then they should boycott Shadow, but apparently, liking a post or clicking a link and typing your name was enough of a protest, when actually it meant nothing. Lizzie had feasted on cereal and gone back to sleep on the settee, as opposed to her own bedroom floor. Amelia had obviously not been out to buy her a proper bed yet, and as a result, the only sleeping arrangements Lizzie had a choice of was her floor, albeit with her own privacy, or the settee. Despite both places being uncomfortable, every night, Lizzie had religiously put on the same pair of Sophie's pyjamas and gone to sleep at bang on 9 o'clock. The number of quirks that Sophie was noticing about Lizzie was growing, but Sophie had no explanation for them other than the ageing. Still on the chair next to her, Amelia was zoned out again, back in the world that was allowing adults to shy away from the realities of life, which included tea. All of them had gone to bed without anything decent. Beans on toast wasn't enough to feed a family of 4. The Sophie Hardy saga was written and produced by M.R. Dale and narrated and produced by Leona Hall. If you enjoyed it and would like to continue to follow the adventures of Sophie and her friends in coming episodes, then please subscribe through one of the many podcast providers out there. The links for each of these can be found on our website. If you require more information, visit our many social media channels, or if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, then be sure to check out our website, www.sophiehardysaga.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.